Welcome to the audio version of the Star Citizens Writer's Guide. I'm your host, Alyciana, also known as Sayla from the Mystic Worlds Gaming blog. Begin transmission.
While lurking around the fiction section of the forums, I've noticed that many of you are new to writing, so this week we're going to tackle an overview of storytelling. There are literally thousands of books and articles about how to tell a story. Part of the difficulty is navigating through the sea of theories and advice and figuring out which works for you. Personal disclaimer: writing is a constant struggle to figure out the best way to tell a story. I am not an expert. The approaches I use to devise and refine my stories and characters are reflective of my personal style and tastes. Please don't consider the information below to be the one true way. Jumping right in, we're going to start off taking a very broad look at some foundations of storytelling. Structure. I'm not sure I can ever stress how important structure is to storytelling. At its core, your structure is your story. It dictates how and at what pace the information and progression of events are unveiled to your reader. Your structure is what makes your story a story and not just a series of events. That may seem like an odd sentence, but let me elaborate. A story is about progression, usually in the perspective of the main character. How do the events in the story challenge and change the main character? Conversely, how do the character's actions affect the story? If you have a character who experiences a series of events, but there's no real progression through them, you quickly find that your story is lacking what's called narrative drive, the propulsion that pushes the reader to want to know what happens next. Progression comes from having a clear idea of where you want your story to go, which is accomplished by outlining your structure and figuring out your beginning, middle, and end. To help illustrate, we're going to begin with a classic form of storytelling structure, the 3-act structure. You may not know what it's called, but if you watch movies or read at all, you are well versed in the 3-act structure. In its simplest terms, it breaks down to setup, confrontation, resolution. Or, I present a problem, I attempt to tackle the problem, I resolve the problem. This approach to dramatic storytelling is usually attributed to Aristotle. Since it is still common in use today, it's fairly obvious he was onto something. To delve a little deeper into it, here's an act-by-act breakdown. Act 1. You establish your character. For grammatical considerations here, a female, her environment and her situation. Classically, you introduce a character who's down on her luck or missing something in her life. Things seem pretty bad / ordinary / depressing until inciting incident. This is the event that activates the story and the character's journey. Aliens invade, terrorists take over the building, the heroine accidentally summons a demon, etc. Act 2. This section usually comprises the bulk of the story as she attempts to tackle the problem. She ultimately fails. The end of Act 2 is generally the main character's lowest point. Example: the antagonist defeats the heroine and takes the guy. It is also important to note that in most cases, by the end of Act 2, the main character knows the villain's plans. Act 3. The main character attempts to resolve the conflict / defeat the villain and succeeds. Afterwards, she reflects on how she's changed or grown based on the events in the story. She's in a better place than when the story started. Once again, this is a massively broad overview of the classic optimistic structure. There's also a similar name for this style of storytelling called the hero cycle, or the hero's journey, made famous by author Joseph Campbell's book, Hero with 1,000 Faces. I would highly recommend looking around online for writings about the 3-act structure. While it is the simplest form of storytelling, it can be very effective and a phenomenal format to practice with if you're interested or just starting out. Pacing. This is a very subjective topic, dictated by the format of the story you're telling, short story versus novel, your personal voice / style, and the genre of the story itself. In a nutshell, your pacing is the speed at which events unfold in your story. A good author knows when to increase the pace and when to slow things down. The ebb and flow is what creates effective tension and suspense. In short, you always want your story to be moving forward. If the momentum starts to lag too much or cease altogether, you'll risk losing your audience. At the same time, if you try to maintain a breakneck, action-like speed throughout your whole story, it will be exhausting to read, and more than likely, dramatic moments will be overlooked in the general rush. Probably the most practical approach to understanding pacing would be to study the works of a similar theme or tone and see how they handle it in their narrative, where it works, and more importantly, where it doesn't work. Character, the reader's guide, your main character, our heroine from earlier examples, is the hub of the story. If she isn't, why is she the main character? Designing your main character and determining why she's in the story is absolutely essential. Do you need to write a 50-page biography before writing your story? No, not necessarily, but go ahead if it helps you. The character's motivation should be fairly clear. Usually, this is expressed as an active sentence: to get her husband back, to defeat the terrorists, to redeem herself. It generally comes from asking the question, what does she want? The answer can be plot-based, to escape prison, or more of a life goal, to be the best pilot in the military. But this motivation is what helps dictate her actions and reactions to the story and the obstacles she encounters. Ideally, you can tie the character's need/motivation into the main conflict of the story. Your hero attempts to save a little girl from slavers because she couldn't protect her little sister when slavers raided their settlement 10 years ago. You've probably heard of the term character arc before. This concept is basically the character's change over the course of the story, or more specifically, your character's change because of the story. A simple contemporary example can be found in District 9, in which the main character Wikus starts the movie hating the aliens. Over the events of the movie, he comes to understand and even help them. The larger the distance between the starting and ending point of the arc, the more dramatic the change. Point of view. Point of view is how you tell your story, specifically what perspective the prose is coming from. Third person, there is an unseen narrator that can shift perspective, follow different characters in different sections. This is the most common perspective, as it allows you to write out thoughts of your characters and cross-cut between locations and situations. Second person, there is a narrator, perhaps even the main character, who addresses the reader directly. Not as common, but for example, the show Burn Notice uses this in its voiceover. First person, written from the perspective of a single person, your main character, allows you to write her thought processes and in her vernacular, speaking style, but you can't break from it. You can't switch easily out of first-person perspective, so you're pretty much locked into your main character's head, which can be limiting to your narrative. Summary. This is just scratching the surface of storytelling, but hopefully it's at least given you an idea of where to look for more information. Here are a few final points. Be clear. Clarity in your writing is a constant battle for everyone. You have a story and characters in your head that you're attempting to translate onto paper in hopes of recreating that experience in another person's imagination. As you become more proficient, you will figure out ways to handle this more elegantly, but you can never go wrong with keeping your story and motivation simple and clear. Clarity becomes even more difficult when you're dealing with sci-fi. The nature of fantastical locations, technology, or worlds requires additional explanation, so keep your description simple and to the point. Find your own voice. Writing and storytelling are fluid concepts, changing and adapting with the tastes of the era. So nothing is set in stone when it comes to telling your story. Everything I've said about character arcs and narrative structure can be subverted or completely ignored, and there are plenty of examples of how to successfully do this. But until you find confidence in your skills and your voice, it doesn't hurt to lean heavily on the classic styles to get your footing. It's very easy to disregard storytelling structures that seem stale to you, but try adhering to them as you start to practice. Look at books, movies, and comics that you love and think about them critically. Ask yourself how they reveal the story and character development. Where are the major turning points? Rewrite. Get used to it. Don't expect everything to be gold. Try and fail. It's okay. If you love the process, just learn from it and keep going. Secondly, if you write something and give it to people, challenge them to be honest in their feedback. Don't get angry if someone doesn't like it. Try to discern what his issue was with it. Is it stylistic preference on his part or a lack of clarity on yours? Most of all, practice. Can't say that enough. That's it for this week's entry. We are in the process of winding down the Writer's Guide and beginning a new serial that we're very excited about and which should start after the live stream. To fill out the final 2 weeks, we're going to turn to you to help contribute to the Star Citizen universe. We've been watching the forums for exciting explanations of the universe that we haven't covered so far. We will pick one idea a week and offer our designers' reactions and notes and workshop the idea with the community. Until next
End transmission. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Your comments and feedback are always welcomed. Links to the actual Writer's Guide are included in the show notes. All music is courtesy of the Star Citizen's unofficial soundtrack, also in the show notes. This is Alyciana, signing off until next time.